So what's up, my tycoons? This is Sergio with another episode of Startup Basics. So are you one of those founders that keeps building things, but they never seem to go anywhere? Well, this is not an uncommon problem. In fact, I myself, before I had a startup that had any kind of traction or success, built probably 4 or 5 little projects. I call them little projects, but I didn't think of them at the time. But I built 4 or 5 things that I thought were going to be groundbreaking, and they weren't bad ideas. They were actually pretty good ideas. I definitely didn't get to the point where I had any kind of meaningful traction. I want you to learn from my mistakes. And in fact, I meet a lot of founders in my office hours and otherwise that are just like that. Oftentimes they're engineers and they love building things. They want to solve the next big, problem, and they want to build a huge tech company, and they'll build one thing, release it out into the wild, and it's not going to get a ton of usage, and they'll give up and build another thing, kind of the next thing that they get excited about, and release that, and that won't get too much traction, and they just kind of keep going and building things, from one product to the next. But before we go into some words of advice, make sure to hit that like button if you've been enjoying my Startup Basics episodes, and definitely subscribe so you can get more episodes like this in the future. What I want to let you know, the number one thing to kind of combat this is that you really have to be in it for the long run. When you commit to a project, don't think of it as, I'm going to put this out there and I'm going to see what happens, or I'm going to build the next big thing and I'm going to, become successful or build a huge startup right away. Instead, think of it as a commitment. I know, if you're like me, you probably have tons and tons of ideas of things that you want to build, but you have to be able to commit to the idea for a long period of time. And how long? If you've been watching my other episodes, I mentioned the stat that on average it takes over 3 years between when you actually start your startup to when you get seed funding. That's a long period of time. And it can take years before you can get any kind of meaningful traction and really validate your idea. Or it can take years before you kind of fine-tune your product and find that magical product market fit where your product really takes off. So if you are working on an idea that you can't commit to working for at the very, very least a year, and I would argue at least 2 years, then go back to the drawing board. Maybe go back to the drawing board. I'm not necessarily telling you to quit, but you should consider working on ideas that you can really commit to working on for a long period of time. There are many, many famous examples of startups that, started out really slow, that went through years of growing pains before they found that magical moment and really took off. My favorite story is that of Justin TV. It's an early Y Combinator startup. They launched in 2007. And they had pretty good growth, but the startup really kind of, and the user growth really kind of started to flatten out. And it wasn't until 2011, or almost 4 years later, that they realized that the folks that are really most engaged with their streaming platform were gamers. So it took them 4 years to get to the point where their company really, really took off. Another one of my favorite examples is Flickr. So you guys might be familiar with the photo sharing website Flickr that was acquired by Yahoo in 2005, I believe. So they started out as a game essentially. In 2002, the game was called Game Never Ending. Once again, it was, they didn't really get a ton of traction. What they realized was that it was really kind of the photo sharing tools that were really kind of popular, and so they pivoted to create Flickr in 2004. So once again, that's another 2 years before they really got meaningful traction and pivoted to something that was that really took off and was very successful. I'll give you a third bonus example of how sometimes it can really take a long time to kind of, find your groove. So Zappos launched in 1999, and I recently read an article that between 2000 and 2002, Zappos ran out of money twice. And of course, they ended up becoming very successful and were acquired by Amazon for $1.2 billion. So what do all of these stories have in common? Well, the thing that they have in common is that it simply takes perseverance and it takes commitment. And sometimes you just don't know when you'll find that magic formula for many, many years. And I know that I personally, on my first 4 or 5 ventures, gave up way too early. There was, I'll name a couple of them. There was Thrio, which was kind of a platform where people would list their top 3, favorite things, whether that's restaurants or movies or nightclubs, whatever. Once again, we launched it and it seemed like a great idea. It wasn't the most beautiful product in the world, but we had no user growth. And we kind of tried, but not really. We didn't really do a very good job of driving users, and we didn't really stick with it and put a ton of effort into marketing. And if you think about it, especially if you're an engineer, that makes total sense, right? You might be an awesome engineer with years of experience building really cool things and really know, your tech and really have a great skill set. But how well do you know marketing? For the most of us, including myself, we're amateurs, right? Maybe this is the first 1 or 2 times when you're really trying to market a product and get users and figure out what is the best messaging, what's the best way to reach your target customers, and figure out how to fine-tune your product to really get to that, magical product market fit moment. And so taking into account the fact that, look, for most of us, doing the marketing and getting our product into the hands of users is a new thing. It's gonna probably take you a lot longer to get to that point where you figure it out. So my piece of advice to you is, even if it takes you a weekend to create your MVP or your product or whatever, definitely commit to spending a long time, a year or 2, to continue working on it, to continue to find ways to get users and get traction and improve your product and find that magical product market fit. Because if you give up too early, you might never get to that billion-dollar unicorn that I know all of you guys want to become. So there you go. There you have it. That's my piece of advice for finally cracking that challenge. If you like Startup Basics, definitely remember to subscribe and leave your comments below with questions or examples of things that worked or did not work as you're building your startup. So I'll see you next time on Startup Basics.